Hello and welcome to Magicbricks Dialogues on MBTV. My name is Siddhart Goel and I'm the head of research and editorial for Magicbricks. Today, I'm going to be hosting a panel discussion with two eminent personalities who are involved in providing student accommodation services in India. Through them, we will understand the segment to understand what is happening out there and what are the future prospects for student housing in India. So, welcome, gentlemen. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Mr. Bharat Agarwal, who is the founder of Hive's Hostels. They have student accommodation spread across Delhi, Noida, Greater Noida, Mumbai, Bangalore, Indore, Dehradun, and Ahmedabad. Secondly, we have with us Mr. Chinmoy Mishra, who is the CEO of HooLiv, which is predominantly present in Delhi, Noida, Pune, Jaipur, and Meerut. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So if I can just start off, with you, Bharat, if you can just, on behalf of the industry, just give us kind of a little overview of what were the biggest challenges that, the student housing segment has faced in the last 2 years, especially against the backdrop of the COVID pandemic. And, after that, Chinmoy, if you can explain to us how things have changed now that we're getting back. So just starting off with you, Bharat, if you can just give a little quick background about what the major challenges were in the last 2 years.
Great. So if we talk about Hive, prior to pandemic, we had close to 40 beds that we were operating on. So all our acquisitions and the entire growth of the company has been done during pandemics. Because we as a company, as a management, we realized that pandemic though was very hampering for the business as a whole, because we are right now in the student housing sector. Now, for a student housing sector, we are directly linked to colleges. Now, for colleges being shut for 2 straight years, it was a great hit to us. Of course, all our properties were shut, but parallelly, we also realized that it was a good opportunity for us to get more properties because they were available at a cheaper rentals. Landlords were not very demanding. So over a period of 2 years, the pandemic, we used it as an opportunity. And prior to pandemic, like I mentioned, we had 40 beds. And when we came out of the pandemic, we were operating at 2,500 beds. So that is when all the acquisition of the property was done. And with pandemic, of course, it was a deeply affected our entire business. But we knew that there's a fine line, there is a bright future ahead. So because there's nothing that's going to last forever. So though there was uncertainty that it might go on till 2023 or might also go on till 2024, nobody knew what the future would be like. But of course, there has to be an end point to it, and the future was bright. So we just made sure of that, and we kept believing in the entire concept. And gradually, once the pandemic is, I think, finally over, we are ahead of it. Things are pretty well. So we have seen an increased demand. The paying capacity of people have improved. People are looking at better quality products. They're willing to pay more for better quality products. More people are inclined towards the organic sector. So of course, there has been a great transition pre and post COVID in terms of student market as such.
Chinmoy, would you like to add something to that, and especially tell us how things have changed now that everyone's gone back to a normal, regular life? Educational institutes have opened up. Students who were doing basically, online education have now moved back to the different towns and cities where their education institutes are actually physically located. So, how have things changed now this year?
Yeah, Sid, the 2 years of the COVID period, I think they have been extremely brutal on the student housing industry. And to be really honest, the first wave, we were still kind of trying to figure out what this is all about. And so somehow we could weather that and so on. But I think the second wave just caused extremely severe headwinds. There is no denying to all of us, not just to student housing. We were certainly in the line of COVID fire, but I think all businesses were impacted to a great extent. But if I have to pick up a few silver linings and to extend on what Bharat mentioned, I think there are a few things which happened for good. One was that pre-pandemic, there was an inventory grab model. People were grabbing up beds, and it was a valuation game. The more inventory you have, the higher valuation you get, and so on. That was the pre-pandemic scenario. And I think, to your question, one of the big changes that we see post-pandemic, if I'm to say that, is that people have gone back to the basics, to the unit economics, to the profitability. So that bed grab model is no longer something that is really in fashion in the student housing industry. As Bharat mentioned, we all of us, we want to be aggressive in our growth, but it has to be a responsible growth. So that is one big change that has happened, Sid. The other one also is that the pandemic has acted as a great leveler for a lot of us. Now, for instance, HooLiv, we started, just after the first wave. We had raised funds in Feb of 2020. We were planning to launch in 1st of April when the world went into a lockdown. So when the lockdown opened up, fortunately, we were having a bit of a cushion when it came to our finances and so on. But a lot of the other folks were not so lucky. And in all fairness to them, nobody could have anticipated the lockdown to be this long and this severe. So when I say that, the COVID acted as a great leveler, is that a lot of the players who were ahead of us, who had raised significant capital and so on, some of them had to shut shop, some of them had to pivot, and some of them started approaching us, and if we could take up their lease obligations and so on and so forth. So I think, in a sense, those 2 years, they kind of leveled the field for all of us. And the last point, Bharat, is that when it comes to the whole, the funding aspects or raising capital, what I feel is that we are yet to see the level of bullishness that the industry had pre-COVID. I think 2017, 18, 19, that was the period when student housing and co-living was making waves in India. We were just about to begin in that journey. So COVID acted as a dampener for sure. So the level of bullishness that investor community had towards this segment is yet to reach the pre-COVID levels. There's still a certain degree of skepticism. People are still not sure in which direction is it moving. And I feel, Sid, that skepticism has a lot more to do with the co-living space rather than student housing. Now, with co-living, I mean the executive housing or the professional, housing for young professional. A lot of the skepticism is kind of being borrowed from that industry, because with offices still implementing work from home, people have gone back to their homes. Maybe they are preferring co-working places, or just working out of homes. So this entire co-living is yet to pick up. Whereas you very rightly mentioned that when it comes to student housing, I think we're slightly on a brighter side, simply for the fact that the moment institutes, coaching centers, and all opened up, students definitely flocked back, for off-campus. There was no longer an online teaching going on and so on. So there is definitely a spurt in the occupancies. Students have started coming back. Institutes have gone back to their normal mode and so on. And the good part also, the other good part, Sid, is that the new sessions are all about to begin. Yeah. So I don't think we have missed the bus when it comes to driving occupancy and so on. So the counselings are on for a lot of colleges and so on. So I think from November, December onwards, and I'm sure Bharat would agree to that, is that we would see the real industry coming into its true colors, when it comes to student housing. So definitely very, very optimistic, Sid. And I think we are at a very nascent stage, and this industry is just, I think, about to take off in 6 to 12 months' time.
Okay. I think that, Chinmoy, really helped to understand, because one of the questions that I did have was to understand that how have operators managed their finances? I mean, have they been dependent more on equity funding, or was it debt funding, or was it just managing cash flows, from the receipts that you were getting? Because that would be something that's a question on the minds of all our viewers. Is that how did operators manage in the last 2 years, and how do they look at investments coming into the sector? I think you've already mentioned that there isn't that kind of bullishness amongst investors right now. But when do you think that will pick up? How do you think that will pick up?
Yeah, sure. So there are two parts to it, Sid. One is that how do we tide over this entire COVID period? I think, as Bharat would agree again, is that all of us who are sitting here today and still, in the growth phase, I think one of the things that helped us was our frugality. We were extremely frugal. We were not into that irresponsible growth model, and that helped us. Of course, we had to resort to all different sorts of measures. We had to reduce the salaries for a while. We had to let go of assets which we felt was no longer profitable. We had to go back to the board, negotiate with the asset owners on a revenue sharing model and not a minimum guarantee. We had to collaborate with, for instance, in our case, we collaborated with groups which were into essential services or manufacturing oxygen concentrators, for example, those kind of companies, to take over the entire assets so that we at least keep our lamps burning. So I think we hustled Sid, we did everything possible to keep the lights on. And in terms of the funding, ours is an industry, Sid, where we have the luxury of looking at both equity and venture debt, or debt financing. I think, I personally come from a technology background, and my previous venture was in technology and so on. Now, where debt financing is still a bit of a struggle, but when it comes to student housing, debt financing is a very viable option. And that is something that a lot of folks relied upon, not just venture debt, but even things like revenue-based financing, invoice financing, or you have working capital financing. And because the moment you look at those sorts of financing, your world is not just restricted to institutional capital or VCs or venture debt firms, but there are several beautiful government programs, Government of India programs, MSME schemes, and so on, which is available to us. So we considered and looked at and also kind of raised funds from both these options, and given the high gross margin and nature of our businesses, the repayments are relatively easier. If you look at venture debt or a pure loan, a term loan, a business loan, and so on. So that's how we went. In terms of the future outlook, Sid, yes, definitely, as I mentioned, the bullishness is yet to reach that pre-COVID level. But what we have seen, if I compare it to 6 to 8 months back, where I think it was extremely difficult even to get a foot in the door, with your model. But now I think we are definitely getting more positive responses. We are getting more yes than no's. 6 months back, it was the standard response was we would like to wait and watch. But I think that is slowly subsiding. A lot more investors are open to the idea of looking at it as a genuine asset class, whether it is a real estate investor, whether it is family offices, or even institutional capital. I think a lot of folks are realizing that now is the time to take a bet on it, because this is going to peak in the next 6 to 12 months. So I think it will, just like any other calamity or pandemic, I think the true nature of the destruction is always realized after the calamity, right? Not during it. So I think some of the the long tail of COVID is still there, and it will take about 6 to 8 months to go away. And I think post that we would see significant capital flowing in. That's my hope. Sid, love to hear your thoughts also, Bharat.
I totally agree with you. I mean, that's the similar thing that even we faced during pandemic. So any debt fund or any venture fund, any investor that we approached during pandemic, the only response that we got, like, we would like to wait because it's a straight, directly pandemic linked industry. So if the pandemic goes on, so will your industry be shut. So the only reply we got, we would like to wait and watch what is happening with pandemic. However, if you see in the last 4 to 5 months, that no, it's definitely not a no anymore. People are keen on exploring the idea, getting more information about the company. So I think, like you mentioned, 6 to 8 months is still a time frame. Post that, we would definitely be seeing more coming into this sector. Because of course, we are still at a very early stage. The sector is still to a very large extent unorganized, which is yet to be organized. So there is definitely a huge demand supply gap, which of course only the organized players like us will be able to fill in. So there is we as a management are expecting money to come into this sector in the next 1 to 2 years.
Just a little follow-up on question, because we are dealing with the investment side of the business, is that pre-pandemic it was widely believed that in India rental housing was giving yields of only 2 to 3%. Co-living and especially even sub-segments like student housing were supposed to offer much higher yields. So there was this whole story, basically a discussion and debate saying that there is a philosophy behind it. You can get much higher yields by investing in student housing. And that's why, like you mentioned earlier, that there was a lot of amount of bullishness before the pandemic. Has that changed now? What are the changes, and what are the reasons for that?
Amount of rentals that we as co-living operators can give for a residential property, that's way better to any individual would give for that rental property.
Sure.
So we are definitely in a capacity to pay better rents in terms of residential building. That is why we have seen it. Even Chinmoy would agree to it, that acquiring properties or getting properties, entire buildings on rent, if you consider 2 years back, was a challenge, because even the builders were not very aware of the entire concept. So they were not developing properties with the student housing angle in mind. But if you see today, our home ground is from Bombay, so we have started operations in Juhu area. Typically, it goes to Narsimunji College. So getting a student housing building in that area was a challenge. It has been a challenge for past 5 to 6 years. However, if you see the trend today, there are 8 to 10 projects which are coming 2 years down the line, which are surely being built with a student housing aim in it. They're typically being designed for student housing purpose, which was earlier not the case. So even the builders have got more acquainted with the idea of student housing, yet they are developing properties with keeping this segment in mind, which is of course beneficial to us. And of course, the core reason being that we are in a position to pay better rental as compared to any individual family or individual person would pay, who is an end user to the residential property. Because there are hardly people who use a residential property for a commercial purpose. They are normally end users. So we pay better rent as compared to any end user. So even the landlords are more inclined to give properties to us rather than renting out to individuals.
I definitely say that. I mean, as you rightly said, it was about 3 to 4% in residential. I think the promise in student housing co-living was somewhere between 8.8, 8.5 to 10 level. And because the industry was also is still so nascent, say in India, that I think a lot of this promise of returns is still quite anecdotal, borrowed from the Western markets, which started slightly before us in terms of the whole co-living. So as Bharat rightly mentioned, a lot of developers are looking at the purpose-built student units, PBSUs, or built-to-suit co-living facilities, and so on. There is another big thing that is catching up, Sid, is the entire concept of fractional ownership. So real estate developers, operators like us, getting onto a fractional ownership platform and having the retail investors fund the entire construction with the promise of a certain return. So I think that concept is also catching up. And yes, I agree with Bharat that lot more of real estate groups are recognizing this as a genuine asset class. And it's no longer a division between residential and commercial, which essentially means shops or offices. But I think student housing and co-living is something that is generating significant interest in the developer community. And so it is good for operators like us because we lack the nuances of actually getting into a real estate construction and building something, and they lack the entrepreneurial spirit, or you could say the whole passion behind driving and managing something. So I think that's a good marriage, and it is definitely here to stay and grow.
Great. I think that clears up a lot of questions that typically most people would have, and I think it's excellent news to hear that a lot of developers are taking interest in doing purpose-built homes. Can you just mention some of these developers? I mean, are these brands or famous names, or are these more local landlords who are building these kind of student homes?
I would say, and correct me, Bharat, if I'm wrong, but my experience has been that there are some of the larger developers who have actually picked it up. I mean, our backers are the Kolte Patil developers. They're from Pune, and they're actually on a similar line where they are constructing few, large student units, which we would take over and operate it. Similarly, recently we took up something from the Phoenix Mills guys. In Delhi too, we are working with a leading developer to do something on a similar line. So at present, Sid, some of the larger groups are into it. We know that in Bangalore, for instance, the embassy is big time into it through their Olive brand. The Rahejas are considering it. I think the Lodhas are already there with another of our peer that they're looking at. So I think some of the big names are there. And it is a matter of time before even the smaller local real estate groups also start recognizing this and getting into it.
That's a question that was going on in my mind because especially if you've got large developers and almost all the names that you mentioned are all listed in public entities also, who are also being very, very active in the commercial office space. And, you've seen the likes of Embassy and all have a REIT listing. And that's the thought that's been going on in my mind, that actually student housing is also, very suitable for a REIT because, it fits in, it ticks all the check boxes.
Sure.
So once, of course, I think there's a certain amount of scale that is built in. And especially if you've got an institutional investor like a Blackstone or a Brookfield, which forays into a business model like this, is that, India can probably see a kind of REIT listing even for student housing. And I think that would be great news for the segment.
Sure. Thank
you for sharing information on that. You also mentioned, and I think this is a question that goes on in a lot of people's mind. Is that, okay, what role does technology play in student housing? Because the traditional models were, of course, PG accommodations, more word of mouth, or going through a local broker or something. You mentioned, Chinmoy, yourself, that you come from actually a technology background, right? So what role does technology and digital play in student housing, and how has it changed? What we expect further from this?
I think, Sid, it's very interesting to ask that, because when we got into this space, one of the things we realized was that when it came to technology in real estate, hospitality, technology was treated merely as an enabler. It's something like, it's good to have. It's great if it's fine if you don't have it. But I think when it comes to student housing, the demography that we're dealing with, 18 to 24, 25 age group, for whom possibly the most expensive real estate they own is their smartphones. Technology can just not be an enabler. It has to be the driver of the entire business. And so that is where a lot of us, and not just HooLiv, but Bharat and his team and every one of us, we realize the potential that technology can bring to the table if we are building an entire model centered with technology at the center. So whether it is providing students with an experiential stay, from basic things like making their payments online, to raising service requests, to changing their meal options, or requesting guest services, to even more nuanced services like providing them soft skill trainings, skill-based trainings, spoken English courses, job interview skills, or even helping them find internships, job opportunities, and so on. Everything can be pushed, provided technology is at the center of it. And the other benefit, Sid, is that what we realized is that as students, when we leave our homes for the first time, the budget with regards to the room rent, there is always a ceiling. Even if you provide a student a Taj experience, you cannot charge a Taj rate, because student is always coming with a budget. However, the student is always willing to spend on peripheral services which he or she believes can or will is helping them in their overall development. Right now, so these kind of things like skill-based trainings or internships and so on, if we would be able to provide them seamlessly through the technology part, then I think there is an opportunity for us as operators also to get that extra dollar out of their wallets, which is beyond the ceiling that they had for their room rental. So it helps us in driving our top lines and not merely relying on keeping the rental prices high year over year, and being that the primary source of revenue. I think, yes, that would still be the primary source, but then there are all other peripheral services, technology driven, which can help, push the top line up. So that is on the student part of it, Sid. Then the other side of things is the entire operations. Now, since this is a business which is definitely services intensive, there is huge manpower involved. In the moment there is a manpower involved, and there is a handshake between technology and manpower, your fault lies exactly where the handshake is. You might have a warden who is sitting in a remote hostel in Meerut, and the warden might say that there are 5 rooms occupied, where in reality there might be 7 rooms occupied. How do you ever know that? So the chances or the potential of leakages are extremely high in a business like ours. And we've also seen with some of the leading hospitality providers in India that they're also struggling with the same, even though they are 10 years into this business. So I think another big benefit of technology, Sid, in a business like ours is how do we make our operations technology level? How do we reduce these leakages? How do we make it so intuitive that we reduce these chances of anyone playing, doing any foul play? So I think that is another big aspect, Sid, that goes into it. And that is where some of us, when we are coming in with fresh entrepreneurial mindset into this entire industry, that is the thing that we bring in, is that, look, we are bringing in technology to disrupt this space. And unlike the real estate groups or maybe even the mom and pop operators who may not have the willingness or even the bandwidth to look at technology as a driver, so that is what I believe, say, technology is and will continue to play a very significant role when it came to student housing, at least.
If you consider technology not from a student point of view at the moment, once your number of beds increase, once your scale of operation increases, there is no way you can do this business unless and until you have the right technology in place. So there is no way you can, your manpower can manage those. Once you cross 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 beds, there is absolutely no way human manpower can be able to run that sort of an operation. You need to have the right technological framework in place only if you want to actually be able to take care of those things. Right from doing the booking process. So earlier, even in our company, bookings used to be done online. People used to walk in, make the payments, do the booking. So gradually we realized that it will, over a period of time, making people do booking in such a way will become very difficult for us to actually track what is happening
Mhm.
to a process wherein all the bookings can only be done through our portal.
Mhm.
Same goes with the rent collection. Earlier, we used to have teams who would regularly be calling up the students for rental reminders and all that.
Yeah.
That was a very tiresome process.
Mhm.
Now, with again technology coming into place, there are automatic reminders that are being sent. There's a automatic late fee that gets added to the rentals. So,
Mhm.
from the management point of view, our player point of view, technology has to a very, very large extent helped us in making the operations very smooth and also giving us an ease of expansion, ease of growing more. Because, of course, you cannot even think of growing if you are existing operation not stable.
Sure.
So the only way you can look at going ahead is when what you have on your plate is totally settled down. And without technology, that is impossible.
Sure.
Secondly, from the student point of view, again, now students, like he mentioned, even we have a Hive Connect program wherein we are giving students various kind of internships. There are corporate events, there are workshops, everything that's been organized. So again, all of this is not possible unless you have the right technology in place. Second, technology helps the students in various maintenance they require. If there's any assistance they need, any 24/7 response team is there and everything is there. So consider doing it manually for a second. It becomes very way too difficult, as well as it become very tiring for the students. So you'll have to again and again follow up with the team and all that. But having the right technology, it just is done on a click. So he raises the request on the app that there's this kind of maintenance we need. It goes to the right person, and within 24 hours, that problem is resolved. So technology is a very important role that technology has to play in our sector.
Sure. Okay. Bharat, can you share also whether you've seen any kind of changes that have happened in, the demands or the requests or the perspectives from students and or their parents, where student housing is concerned? Because, initially, of course, because of the pandemic, there were changes which were brought about by the pandemic, and they had to be done, social distancing and all those things. But now that we're getting back to a normal life, okay, and hopefully, we won't suffer any more lockdowns or any of those kind of things, events taking place. So, in the normal scenario, are you seeing any kind of changes, in terms of the expectations that parents or the students have?
See, I feel that post-pandemic, people have become more aware, probably sitting at homes for years, reading about more stuff, going across new things over internet.
Hmm.
People have become more aware of the entire concept.
Hmm.
So earlier, a person who's going out to study, his idea was to get an accommodation that was just a bed, a cupboard, a
Hmm.
study table. That is typically what a person had in mind when he was going out to study in some other city. So that is typically what accommodation was. Now, if you consider today, there are 10 things that he has in mind when he's looking for a hostel or a student housing property. He wants a gaming zone, he wants a community room, he wants a library, he wants various events to happen in a hostel. Now, all this awareness has got into people's mind during pandemic. Second, I feel people are willing to spend more for a better sense of living. So there, if you provide them the right quality, if you provide them the right infrastructure, so I think this was a problem with us prior to pandemic. Even if you increase the quality of level, people were not willing to pay more. But
Mhm.
with people being stuck in their homes for 2 years, coming out of their houses after 2 years, people want a better standard of living. People want to spend more if they are getting a good life. So that is typically, I think, pandemic has also increased the paying capacity of the people in if you're giving them the right product. So that's one change that has happened.
So that is quite an interesting, relevation, because typically, I think most people think that okay, student housing is a very cost sensitive segment. Every student has a budget; they don't want to really go on beyond that. But based on what Chinmoy mentioned earlier, that you can provide certain services and amenities for which especially if students think that it's going to help them in their careers and everything, they're ready to pay for that. You brought in also kind of a different perspective, but still added on to the value, saying okay, today the paying capacity has increased, okay, and they are ready to pay for better living conditions overall. I mean, the environment, not just the room, but everything else. So that is interesting. But it does bring one particular question in mind that we're also continuously reading about the fact that given the global events that are going on, there is a very strong fear or negative sentiment that's building up in terms of that might be a global recession because inflation is going too high. Central banks across the world are increasing the interest rates to try and control the cash flows. So there's this whole, it's a double-edged sword that we've got. We're living in conditions where inflation is going up, okay, but it also can be a kind of a recession that might come in because governments are consciously trying to slow down the rate of the growth that's happening. How do you think this would impact your businesses and your sector?
I think, Siddhart, definitely we have been, hearing those things, the entire winter coming and so on. I think it might impact the entire profitability in a longer run if we are unable to, kind of keep increasing or escalating the rentals or the overall packages in a way that we have planned, so that keeping in mind the break-even point or keeping in mind the payback periods and so on, and also the fact that the contractual arrangements with the asset owners typically include a rent escalation every X number of years and so on. So I think if we are unable to keep pace with that because of the liquidity crunch or because of the inflation and so on, that might put a downward pressure on the profitability for sure. But I think on the brighter side of things, Sid, education, as all of us know, is a business which is going to continue to thrive, and it's a bit of a recession proof, if I might say, right? And even if you look at historically, Sid, and that is actually something that's tied up to what the previous point that Bharat mentioned in terms of quality of living and so on. So if you look historically in the student housing or just PGs and hostels that we call, it's not that the students were paying any less. Students were obviously paying a significant amount. It's just that the asset owners never really had an incentive to invest and upgrade in the assets because the demand has been so good year over year, recession or no recession. Students have been moving out of their homes. The migration has been going up. Migratory student population has been growing up. Private universities have been mushrooming. So these asset owners never really had a period where they had to worry about driving occupancy. And so never really had an incentive to work on the assets. So now when we come in and we say, look, we are going to charge a delta higher than what you are paying. But in exchange of that, we are going to provide you a standard of living which is significantly higher than what you are used to. I think that's where the delta that Bharat spoke about comes into picture. Okay, fine. Let's extend our budget to a delta higher for a better quality of living. So I think if you take into account all those things, the pressure of recession coming in, or the inflation, definitely there would be some this thing. But I think for an organized operator like us, if we are able to manage that standard of living and the quality and driving occupancy would be the key during those times. And we are able to be profitable at a unit level. I think we should be able to tolerate the pressure or the headwinds better. But then again, it comes down to how we are kind of maintaining that level of quality, how we are driving occupancy and so on. But the pressure will definitely be there, no denying.
Bharat, anything that you'd like to add to that?
Just one thing to the recession point. I think that since student housing per se is directly linked to the universities, there is always going to be demand for students coming to those universities. Plus, second point being, we live in India, and still for the first year students, second year students, the payment are still being done by the parents and not the students.
Yeah.
And considering the typical Indian parent mentality, they are always going to spread their sheets just to provide a better stay to their students so that he can study well.
Sure.
So this is one thing that I personally think will not be much affected by any recessions that come in the future, because again, we are directly linked to the education. And
Sure.
education is one thing that's not going to fall anytime. Yeah. It's always going to go higher.
But also, given that, both of you all are actually operating in tier 1 and tier 2 cities, okay? But, what is your experience been? Because most people would, have this question saying that, okay, is it better to be present in tier 1 cities, or is it better to be present in tier 2 cities where you see higher demand or higher profitability? What has been your own experience where this is concerned?
Right now, we are majorly operating in tier 1 cities because there is still a large scope that's in these cities. Okay. So once we think that we and collectively the operators have exhausted that scope, that is when we'll plan to move to tier 2 and 3 cities. Because of course, if you consider the profitability is always higher in cities wherein the rentals are higher. So if you go to any tier 2, 3 cities, the people are not willing to spend more than 7 to 8,000 per month. Whereas if you consider tier 1 cities, they are willing to go up to 70 to 18,000. If you consider Bombay, they are willing to go up to 45, 50,000 a month. The higher the rental you are able to charge, the higher your profitability is. But of course, once your cities get exhausted, you'll have to go down to the lower cities. So if not today, 2 years down the line, we will also be present in our 2 and 3 cities after we are done with the tier 1.
I mean, here said, I would digress with Bharat a bit, simply because we are predominantly a tier 2, tier 3 player. And we believe more on the Bharat story than the India story. We are extremely bullish on that, and for a few different reasons. I think when you look at a student community and you look at some of the smaller towns and cities in India, I think they're amazing markets, very, very virgin, very blue ocean, and highly unorganized. The supply is not a constraint. The cost of acquisition is much lower. I can take a 600-bed facility in Bhubaneswar for a fraction of a cost compared to a 600-bed in Delhi or in Mumbai. So my cost of acquisition is much lower, and that automatically brings my payback period, makes it a little smaller. In terms of the profitability, I would disagree with Bharat. I would in fact argue that the profitability is almost the same, if not better, in tier 2, tier 3. Yes, your ability to charge, the ticket size might be less in tier 2, tier 3, but the same again, your operating expenses, the variable expense, both the fixed and the variable costs are also lower as compared to a tier 1 city. So your net profitability is almost at a 25 to 30% margin, which is industry margin, whether you are in tier 1, tier 2, irrespective of that. So in terms of profitability, the EBITDA, I think it's pretty much the same. So it's not a question, say, between good, right or the wrong markets, but I think it's just a business strategy. If you're a Caterpillar, you choose the tier 1. If you're Komatsu, you choose tier 2, tier 3, right? So I think it is operators like us where we believe the market to be, and where we believe it to be growing. I think for us, we have close to 6,000 beds now, all predominantly in tier 2, tier 3, very few that we have in Delhi and so on. And our plans are to significantly expand in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, because we feel that one, as I mentioned, there's a lot of unorganized players. Not many organized operators are yet to come in. So there is an opportunity to build a moat in these places. So that's more of a business call or a strategy rather than being a right or wrong market. Both the markets have their own challenges, their own benefits, of course.
I think that really helps, because when we have two digressing opinions, and I think that that's the beauty of the country and the economy, is that there's actually scope, to accommodate all kinds of these things, because I think it largely depends on different experiences. So that's been my personal experience also, is that it all depends on how you can manage things. So if you can find a growth story in tier 2 cities, that's also great. If you focus on tier 1 cities, and that's where your strengths are, then I think that also makes a lot of sense. I think towards the end, one of the questions that comes up very importantly is that this is, the student housing segment is still largely an undersupplied segment, right? I mean, there's still tremendous scope for growth. There's a lot of headroom available, but there are certain limitations. So if you can elaborate on what those limitations are and what needs to be done to ensure that student housing, as an asset class also grows, whether it has to be done from the government side, from the investor side, whether something else needs to happen. What are those aspects? Chinmoy, if you can take that question.
Sure. Yes, definitely. I think there is a huge gap right now. I think some of the reports, if you look at them, they suggest that there is a requirement of some 9 million student housing beds at present, and I think operators like Bharat, us, and all at the present, the top 10, we are catering to not more than 200, 300,000 beds. So there's a huge gap. There is a gap of, there is a 1 bed available for every 6 students, 6 students enrolled in higher education, and so on. So yes, there's definitely a gap. There's extremely unorganized market, mom-and-pop operators, small assets, PGs, and so on, which are running. So I think when we talk about the evolution of this space, the whole concept of purpose-built student units, the fractional ownership coming in, real estate groups looking into it as a genuine asset class, constructing these things, I think those are the ones which will drive the supply, make it more organized, and so on. And so that is something positive happening. The other thing on the government side also, Sid, is that, if I take a contrast, I'm coming from a very health tech background. If you look at a health tech space, it is something that is an extremely regulated market, and rightfully so, because it concerns health. When it comes to real estate, hospitality, student housing, it's an extremely unregulated space. Okay, and recently we had this whole thing of GST coming in, where we are now able to charge GST and so on. There's still a lot of confusion, a lot of gray areas and so on. So I think there needs to be something from the government side as well to bring in those regulations, bring in those standardization, whether it is in terms of these assets fall under residential side, they fall under a commercial side, what are going to be the GST rates, how it is going to be charged. I think there's lots and lots of room for clarity coming in. And the more regulation we have, the more clarity we have coming in, I think there will be more groups interested in these assets. There will be more investment coming in because you provide a safeguard their investments and so on because of these regulations. So I think it works that way, Sid, that we need this thing to happen from the government side as well. And at the same time, I think the industry is still at a nascent stage. So given 2-3 years time, we think we should mature more for other players to also look at. So that's my view. So,
Bharat, anything you'd like to add?
I absolutely agree to what he said. Of course, in terms of supply also, we have seen major, like we were discussing earlier, we have seen major developers coming into the space, major, even small builders come into the space. So of course, people, that awareness has started to reach various builders and all top building houses. So if not today, probably by next 1 or 2 years, we will see a lot of supply coming in from these organized players. There will be surely purpose-built student housing, which was earlier not the case. So I think, like you mentioned, we are still at a very early stage, but we are hoping that we will grow at a very rapid speed. So 2 years down the line, we should have various options in the market, which are particularly built for student housing. And of course, there is a need for government intervention as well. Like you mentioned, GST. GST is still a very gray area for us. I mean, the industry, the industry is the same, but there are various people following different aspects of it. Somebody is going after let's go without GST. There are people who are charging GST. So even we as operators, we are still not sure that how we are supposed to go about the entire thing. It's still a give. So we need regulation on these aspects.
I think, thank you, gentlemen. I think this really helps. Just towards the end, any final, words that you have, either in terms of, it could be your personal opinion on what the trends are for the next 5 years, or whether you have any piece of advice for other people who are looking at either investing in this particular business or getting into this particular business. Anything that that you'd like to share for our viewers. Bharat, if we can just go with you first.
See, I personally am very bullish on the entire market, on the entire segment. I think we had a hit because of pandemic, but there is a great future that lies ahead. If you consider the Western countries, student housing is a $1 billion industry. It is a proper organized sector, wherein if you come to India, like we were discussing earlier, keep aside tier 1 cities. People in tier 2 and 3 cities are not even aware of what organized student housing is. The only thing they know is a PG or a hostel. So there is a great scope with the kind of population that we have in a country, the kind of demography we have in a country. So there is still a great scope for operators to get into various cities and get people aware of what organized student housing is.
Final thoughts on it from my side. This is the space. Said, I don't think it is a winner takes all space. I think there is ample space for a lot of folks. It's very, I think if I have to draw a parallel, I think it will be with the e-commerce industry. The way that e-commerce boom happened in India, it wasn't a winner take all. There is a place for several players to be in this space. It is such a virgin market. So in the longer term, I think, maybe in the shorter term, if I begin with that, I think we will be seeing a lot of more consolidations and mergers happening. Because this space is now kind of hotting up, so there are a lot of operators who are getting into this space, who are running assets and running it good. I think they may not have the scale, but they've built very suitable assets. So I think we would be seeing a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the next year or 2 years, and post that there would be maybe a 10-15 large operators. Very similar to the e-commerce space, who would be managing this entire market. I think that is where we are heading into. And of course, I think I agree with Bharat that the bullishness with regards to this being an asset class is only going to go up. Hopefully, we won't see the pandemic ever again. We have seen the last of it. So yeah, I mean, both of us are extremely bullish, Sid, and that's the reason we are still, going at it.
Great. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your time and your views and experiences with our viewers. I'd really like to thank you on behalf of all our viewers. To our viewers, I would just like to say that if you've liked this particular panel discussion, do click on the like button, share your comments and suggestions for further dialogues that we can have on MBTV. And of course, do not forget to subscribe to MBTV for more videos on informational and engaging aspects of in the Indian real estate sector. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, MBTV. Thanks, Bharat. Nice talk.